room service. If I like, I order twice. Hibachi, got the gravy on the rice.
Pittsburgh Steelers fans, welcome back to another episode of the Steelers Q&A. It's a Thursday night. It's a little bit later than normal. Apologies for that. We're having some technical difficulties with my guest for the evening. You know him well. He joins me every week on the Steelers Fix and also on the Draft Dynasty podcast, which we'll be recording a little bit later after this show. It's Andrew Wilbar. He'll be joining us in just a little bit. So buckle up. We're going to have a fun show. I am excited to talk about the Steelers and this game coming up. It's going to be an absolute thriller on Sunday when the Pittsburgh Steelers host the Baltimore Ravens and get a chance to show who they are to the rest of the league. And as Steelers fans, we sit here and we recognize, I think most of us, that this team is legit and that they have a legit shot at being really good this year and being in the mix for a Super Bowl run, or at the very least a chance to be in the mix when it comes to winning playoff games, maybe even hosting a playoff game or two as a high seed in the AFC if they can win this division. They're in the pole position. That's been one of our favorite terms all season, all off season, is pole position when we're talking about Russell Wilson and how he sat with the Steelers. I think you can say that about the Pittsburgh Steelers in regards to where they stand in the AFC North as well. They have the pole position. They are the best team in the division right now. They've been the most consistent team. Their wins are really impressive. They're whoa, hey, we got Andrew Wilbar in. And a big echo. I don't know if you can hear the echo. Welcome
I'm in here. I had no clue it was going to pop me up automatically. I don't think it's ever done that before.
I don't know why it did that, but hey, we're happy you're here.
I'm glad to be here. Hopefully, I'll be able to join on my laptop in just a second. I'm having some technical issues, so that is why I am vertical instead of horizontal.
Well, I think we're having a little bit of an echo on your end.
Okay.
I'm hearing myself come back. So check your audio there for a second. And I'll keep talking about the Steelers and where they sit in the AFC North. I think when you're talking about this team, like I was saying, they've been the most consistent unit in all three phases in the AFC North. The Ravens have been more explosive, you could say, on offense. The Bengals have been more explosive on offense, but both of those defenses have been bad. At times, just straight up bad. The Ravens defense is really good against the run, but they're the worst in the league against the pass. They give up a lot of yards. They give up a lot of points. The Bengals are right there too. And then the Browns, they just have been bad in all three phases. Even on defense, there are games where they are just not able to do anything on the side of the ball that you thought that they would be best at. So the Pittsburgh Steelers, the most consistent team in pole position as we sit here today with the Ravens on tap. And Andrew, we'll try you here in a second. I think if I'm not talking, that the echo won't be a problem. So I wanted to ask you, though, because the Pittsburgh Steelers have been dominant, right? They've been dominant in this matchup for the last 4 years. And there's reason to believe that they can continue that, but there's also reason to believe that the Ravens have a better shot this year than they have in previous years of messing up what the Steelers want to do to shut down Lamar Jackson. You add a guy like Derrick Henry. The big question for me is, can Pittsburgh maintain its dominance over their biggest rival in what will be a very unique iteration of it, I think, this late in the season for it being the first matchup?
Yeah, also it's got to play with the Steelers' mind a little bit, just seeing all of the divisional matchups still to come after that. Of course, you have to turn around really quickly. And even though the Browns are not a good team, they're not a team you want to play on short rest. It's not just going to be a cakewalk game. It's an in-divisional game on a Thursday night. Nothing is a given. And you talked about the Derrick Henry effect. I'm not worried about Lamar Jackson beating the Steelers. He has not proven that he can yet in his career. However, Derrick Henry already has proven he can. And we see what he has added to this offense. And it adds a totally different dimension with this offensive line, with this scheme in place. It fits him to a T. And the Steelers have not faced anything like this in ground games this year. They've faced several good running backs, but they haven't faced anything to the level of what they're about to face with Baltimore. They better come ready. If not, it's going to be a long game.
Yeah, I sit here and I look at the potential that the Steelers have to play so competitively when the Ravens offense is on the field and the Steelers defense can be the strength of the team that it has been for so many years, right? And has been also for this season. But to me, the Ravens, there's a hole on this team, and it's that defense, that pass defense, to where the Steelers offense actually might have an advantage in this game and could be the difference. And we talk about what Baltimore brings to the table, and it is so dynamic on the offensive side of the ball. I've been saying that I think Lamar Jackson's playing as I think he's been the best quarterback in the league so far this year. And that to me is holding true. And then you talk about Derrick Henry, the ageless Derrick Henry at this point. I mean, what can't he do? How long can he go with this? No need to question him. He's the Tom Brady of running backs, if you will. So I think it's time to sit back if you're a Steelers fan. And I think the history of the matchup, 7-1 in the last 8 for Pittsburgh, that's out the window at this point. And to me, it's a brand new ball game. And that scares me a little bit in matchup number 1 here. What are we going to get from the Ravens? What are we going to get from the Steelers? How different does it look? That would be my question. What say you?
I agree. This is not a game that is going to – Derrick Henry is going to determine a lot whether the Steelers can stop him or not. But I think the determining factor in this game is really which team can hit the big play down the field. We've seen the Steelers been able to connect a few times, Russell Wilson to George Pickens or whoever it may be. Maybe you get Calvin Austin there. I think it would be sweet to see Calvin Austin go off for a big game. We know how much the Ravens wanted to draft him if the Steelers had not taken him right before them in that 4th round. I would love to see Calvin Austin have a big game. But it's going to come down to, I think, who can be the more efficient team through the air, which is totally different because the Steelers front, I still think Derrick Henry is able to perform as good as he has against any front. But the Steelers are one of the better units, I would say, up front, and so is Baltimore. Both secondaries at times have been suspect. I would trust the Steelers over Baltimore's by far.
Right.
But I still know how good Lamar Jackson can be when he is on in terms of hitting the deep ball. Not great accuracy over the intermediate and shorter routes. But if he can hit someone deep, whether it be a Zay Flowers, he hasn't been doing a whole lot lately. If they can connect on him deep, it could put a lot of stress on the defense. I think that's going to be the determining factor, which is very abnormal for a Steelers-Ravens game. You think, this is going to be low-scoring game in the trenches. I could see this. If either team gets off to a fast start on offense after a quick score, I think you could see some no huddle, and this could be a shootout game similar to what we saw with Baltimore and Cincinnati a week ago.
Yeah, I mean, it could end up very similar to what we saw out of Pittsburgh, Washington as well this last week, right? Where maybe it doesn't get up into the 30s because these teams know each other so well. But maybe it's a high 20s game. Maybe it comes down to a play or two at the end of the game and for one team to lock this one in. And I do think it'll be close. I don't anticipate a blowout from either side. But I do think that it's premature to go into this and say, well, the Steelers have been beating the Ravens. They own the Ravens. So this is a win for the Steelers. I think that's very premature to come at it from that regard. And I think most people would agree with that overall. But all right, so let's get into a couple questions. Well, first I wanted to let's talk about this first. A good I guess statement here from Gavin Anthony, something that I think we've all noticed. This Ravens team is very unravenian. I like the how you put that there, Gavin. They really are. This is an unusual Ravens team, and I'm not talking about running the football. They always can run the football well. I'm not talking about Lamar Jackson and the offense being able to create explosive plays. I think it's really strange how poor this defense has been at times. And even though they're one of the best teams in the league against the run, I think part of that is because teams know they can throw against them. And it may also be the other way around where teams or the Ravens are scoring a ton of points and teams have to throw the ball a lot to keep up. But I think part of that is that's what works. You catch up to the Ravens by throwing the ball on them. And it's uncharacteristic to be the worst defense in the league against the pass for the Ravens. And they're not super physical on the back end like they usually are this year. They seem more finesse, and it is so strange. What would be your take on this? Why do they feel so different this year?
They don't have the same talent that they do in the secondary. Baltimore, they find ways to make it work on the edge. But ever since Terrell Suggs, really, they haven't had a great pass rush from the exterior. They create pressure from the interior, but it all starts with the coverage. They don't have that this year. They've been very inconsistent in the secondary. The safety has been all over the place. They're asking Kyle Hamilton to be doing practically everything. And there's just not a whole lot of glue there in that secondary right now. There have been some injuries, things they've been struggling with. Schematically, there have been a few changes this year. They're trying to mix up coverages, but it hasn't been working very well. They need to get back to a little bit more man coverage, just like I think the Steelers do. That has been very different for Baltimore in the secondary because that applies so much to the rest of their defense. They require strong coverage, and they really get a lot of coverage sacks, really is what they do. And when that secondary is not what it's supposed to be, and that's what the case is this year, they're struggling. They're still great against the run, but that pass defense has been horrible because of that. They're getting picked apart in the secondary, not allowing the defensive line to be able to get home.
Yeah, I've kind of questioned some of the decision making that they've made on the back end, like Nate Wiggins. That he doesn't feel like a Raven in the secondary, right? He's not a physical player back there. He's more of a, like I said, a more of a finesse corner. He's a zone corner, and he's got speed, yes, but not a lot of physicality, and that seems very unravenian, if I can borrow Gavin's lingo there. So it's strange. And Kyle Hamilton, yeah, he's a really good player, a really good safety. He can do a little bit of everything. He can lay the boom in the box. He can cover. He's got range and athleticism. But outside of that, Marlon Humphrey's not having a good year. He's just not a good corner this year. And the depth has been a concern. I know they were making a push to go get Marshawn Lattimore before the Commanders were able to snag him at the trade deadline. They know where they're weak. And I think a lot of it has to do, Andrew, with something that nobody's talking about anymore because we're halfway through the season. Mike McDonald's gone, and they're feeling the effects of that. And Zach Orr's a good coach. I think he's doing a great job with this run defense with the guys up front. But the secondary is really struggling this year without McDonald and a bunch of those guys gone from this defense. It's worth mentioning the continuity that the Steelers bring into this game is far greater than what the Ravens are. And usually they're pretty neck and neck in that regard. But the Steelers have more continuity on both sides, on the defensive side of the ball. And they're not too far behind on the offensive side of the ball. This is Todd Monken's second year in Baltimore. It is Arthur Smith's first year in Pittsburgh. Not too far behind in that regard either. So I think that is playing into this story a little bit.
I agree 100%. And I think one thing that's interesting, Patrick Queen hasn't played to the level that I think any of us were hoping he'd play. But I will say in the role that he had in Baltimore when he was the number 2, that front seven was way better than what it is this year as well. They've been good, especially against the run. But Queen did contribute to their pass rush as well because there was so much attention given to Smith and Queen on the inside that gave a little bit more freedom to the edge rushers to wreak havoc in the backfield. Yeah. To be an underlying thing, I still would like to see more out of Queen from Pittsburgh, but at least he's not on the opposite side for this game.
Right. Yeah, and let's be fair here too. He was incredible last week against Washington. maybe that's the breakout game. Maybe that's the one we needed from Patrick Queen for him to really feel out this defense and be ready to rock and roll. And he's going to be extra motivated this week to face a Ravens team that gave him a lot of crap when he left and joined the Steelers. They were not his teammates were not a fan of his anymore, especially a guy like Marlon Humphrey, who has no problem telling it how he feels. So we're going to go ahead and take a break here. And when we come back, we're going to answer another question. We'll get to some more comments and questions that you guys have. So keep those coming. But Andrew, just real quick, take a break here. If you're listening on the audio side, don't go anywhere. We will be right back. If you're here watching live, we are not going anywhere. So stay tuned. Welcome back to the Steelers Q&A. It's Jeremy Betts and my good buddy Andrew Wilbar joining me for this episode. We get you on here every now and then, Andrew, on the Q&A to answer some questions. Let's pull up a new one here from Afton Fored. Obviously, one of our most loyal followers here, loyal listeners. Afton always has great questions. We appreciate this one because this is a walk down memory lane, Andrew. And I know you're a young kid. I know you're you don't have much life experience. I'm just messing. You're what, a junior in college now? Is that right? Junior in college? Senior? Nuh-uh. Graduating this year?
Yes, I am.
All right. Congratulations. I don't know why I thought you were still a junior.
I act like it.
There you go. So let's go down memory lane here a little bit and let's talk about favorite moments from the Steelers-Ravens matchup of all time. So I'll open the floor up to you, Andrew. What is your favorite Steelers-Ravens moment of all time in your watching of the rivalry experience for you?
Oh man, this one, I don't want to steal yours because I'm pretty sure I know which one yours is going to be.
Okay.
I'm trying to think of something different.
No, take whatever you want because I've got multiple ones that I can talk about. So
the first memory, not the best memory, but the first memory I had of the Steelers and Ravens matchup was, I don't know why this stuck in my head, but was a Sunday Night Football matchup when Dennis Dixon had the start. The Steelers were playing their old gold helmet throwbacks.
Yes.
Every ball was thrown at the ankles. There were no interceptions, but every ball was thrown at the ankles of wide receivers.
Yeah.
They had to look out for every single pass. I don't know why I remember that, but
how could we forget?
I believe it was a Thanksgiving matchup. I know it was an NBC covered game. It was one of the games where Ben just completely went off. It was, I want to say it was one of the Thanksgiving matchups. Really came on the second half. Antonio Brown had a big game for them. And the whole game, Chris Collinsworth is finally talking about this. This guy should be in the MVP conversation. This guy's the best receiver in football. And that's the first time I'd ever heard someone like Chris Collinsworth, who I respect a lot overall as an announcer, but gave that much credit to someone like Antonio Brown. I'm like,
yeah, wow,
this is incredible. I loved that game.
Okay.
I'm going to let you go with this one because I know where you're going to go here, so I'm going to leave that one to you. But I'm
so
agree with you.
Yeah, so I've got two, and my favorite one of all time for sure is the Troy Polamalu pick 6 in the AFC Championship game in 2008. It was the weightiest, biggest play in the rivalry ever because this was a Joe Flacco rookie year. Let's not forget that this was a Ravens team riding a rookie quarterback to the AFC Championship game, and the Steelers had already beaten the Ravens twice that year, and you had to go beat them a third time, and they traveled to your building. It was a tight game the whole way. You take a little bit of a lead, and they have a chance, though, with time left on the clock, and James Harrison coming through the line of scrimmage, hitting Joe Flacco in the hip, forcing that ball a little bit more inside than Flacco wanted, and Troy Polamalu just reading his eyes the whole way, taking that ball away, cutting it back up the field, getting into the end zone, solidifying the win. That is my all-time favorite moment in Steelers-Ravens history. But a close number 2, and this wasn't in a playoff game, a close number 2 for me is the Immaculate Extension by Antonio Brown on Christmas Day. That's just an all-time individual effort that you'll never see again. It was a back-and-forth game. The Steelers had to come back, I think, from 13 points down or something like that in the fourth quarter to even have a shot in that game, and they did it. And that was for all the marbles. That was to win the division, and the Steelers did that. They won the division. They That was 2016, I believe. They end up going on a playoff run and get to the AFC Championship. It just was just an incredible experience to be sitting there with my family on Christmas Day watching that and then have that happen. It was truly incredible.
Yeah, that was the one I was thinking you were going to go with. I actually did see that in Palomalu pick six in person, not at the game, but I saw it.
Oh, okay.
I watched the game. I should clarify. No, I was 5 years old at the time, but I do remember that one. So that one is actually probably the first memory I had. I lied about the Dennis Dixon one. I do remember that one. And I remember being so excited. I was watching it with my grandpa at his apartment that he was staying at. I would always go over and watch the games with him a lot of times, and got to learn a lot of the players' names. My grandpa was teaching me a lot about football at that time. I was really starting to develop an interest into it. And, good times.
Yeah, absolutely. Another couple, another one that I'll mention at least, Ben Roethlisberger coming off 6 touchdown passes against the Colts in a big time game, does it again against the Ravens. I mean, just to see Roethlisberger dunking on the Ravens like that was a feel-good moment of all feel-good moments for a Steelers team that absolutely routed the Ravens in one of the very few times that you'll ever see a score that lopsided. They could not stop Roethlisberger throwing the ball to Martavis Bryant, Antonio Brown, Marcus Wheaton got in the mix. I mean, that was looking back on some of the wide receivers that the Steelers carried in that time frame. I mean, Andrew, I don't know if you knew this, but at one time the Steelers had Hines Ward, Mike Wallace, Antonio Brown, and Emmanuel Sanders all on the same team.
Emmanuel Sanders, I remember that.
That's insane that all of those guys were all on the same team, and just insane.
What's crazy is at the time, we had thought that Antonio Brown was maybe the worst of those guys. Mike Wallace is a speedster. He's going to be the most electric receiver in the league. Emmanuel Sanders can do a little bit of everything. And, there's this Antonio Brown guy. Yeah, he's pretty good for a 6th-round pick. Yeah. And then he becomes the best receiver in the game.
Yeah, best receiver in the game, best receiver in Steelers history, probably went as far as talent and production goes over the course of his career. But good stuff. I always enjoy going down memory lane here. If anybody has any more questions, please put those in here. We want to answer those. My question to you, Andrew, at this point, let's get back to the game coming up. And if you had to put weight on this game as for chasing a division title, who needs this one more if they want to win the division in 2024?
Because of the sake of schedule, I'm going to say the Steelers need it more. I think the Ravens have an easier road the rest of the way than what the Steelers do. But I do think that there's more weight on this game specifically for the Steelers. It's the one that's at home. It's the one that you have before you've been beaten up with any of the other divisional games. The Steelers, I mean, we have an 0-0 record going into this game. If you lose that first one, puts a lot of pressure on these upcoming games. Cleveland on a short week's rest. Then you got Cincinnati. You got all these teams in just a short period of time. You have to hit on this first one. I think it's the home one. This should be the easiest of the 2 games to win, I would think, barring a Derrick Henry injury by the second game. Yeah, this is the game that you've got to win if you're the Steelers. So from that aspect, I would say there may be more pressure on the Steelers. But I think that I would say that the Ravens have an easier road to get there. If at this point, the thing about having especially when it's in division, you have 2 games you're playing each other. A lot of times when it's 1-1, it's just a wash. Yeah, Steelers have a lot more work they need to do inside the division. So for that reason, I'm going to say the Steelers need this more. There's more pressure on the Steelers. I'm going to go for those reasons. I just really think that there's a lot more to the Steelers having to win this game. They have a much more difficult road. They need to come away with this one.
Okay. I think I agree with that. And I don't think the Ravens schedule is necessarily easy. I don't think you were saying that either, but it's definitely easier. Like you got Steelers this week. If you're the Ravens, you got to go play the Chargers on Monday Night Football. That's not going to be an easy game. You get to host the Eagles, so that's a little bit better hosting them instead of having to go to Philadelphia. And then it's the Giants, then the Steelers again on Saturday. Then on Christmas Day, they get the Texans. That's not going to be an easy game. And then you close against the Browns, who already beat the Ravens once this year. So there is a chance here to see the Ravens lose several more games, but I agree with you. The Steelers need it more. I think would love to start this run against the AFC North with a win. I think they're going to be highly motivated to do so. And I'm just excited for, I'm just excited for the rest of the league talking heads, whatever you want to call them, to see the Steelers in a game that you can't deny anymore. Like, the bar keeps moving in the national media for the Pittsburgh Steelers. It's like, well, they haven't beaten anybody yet. They beat Washington, and everybody's like, well, I still don't know if they're good enough because we haven't seen enough out of this offense yet. And then now it's the Ravens. If the Steelers beat the Ravens, what's the excuse going to be this time? Is it, oh, well, they just own the Ravens. It's a division game. Whatever. Anything can happen in those. That's probably what it will be. But to me, you've got a chance to make a statement. And I've never been one of those people. Let me put it this way. I've always enjoyed being a fan of the Steelers more when the expectations are high, when they're one of the league's juggernauts, everybody knows it, and it's Super Bowl or bust. That's when I'm like, okay, let's rock and roll. The underdog story is fun. The overlooked team is fun and whatever, but I'm ready to be one of the top dogs again. I'm tired of being the underdog story. And to me, if you win this game, you put yourself in the top dog category. You're no longer an underdog. You're one of these guys, one of these juggernaut teams that can go out and beat anybody. I'm ready for that to happen. I hope it does happen. And I don't know how you feel about that. But I kind of see the Steelers as having a shot to really make a statement this week.
They do. And you're starting to see the media give a little bit more attention to them. But I know a lot of people in the comments were talking about, Russell Wilson, what's his future in Pittsburgh, everything like that. I think that this is a game that if Russell Wilson comes out of, he's going to start generating the media attention again, which I don't know if that's going to be a good thing or not for the Steelers. I think the fact that everyone's kind of sleeping on the Steelers has helped Russell Wilson because Wilson is good at being the underdog. He really is. I'd like to kind of stay that way. But once the media gets involved, they're going to get involved after a game like this. Let's not forget that we have a Kansas City team that if they lose to Buffalo this week, you don't have any more undefeated teams either. So now everyone's just kind of all on the same field. You have a 2-loss Steelers team. It's anyone's AFC. It's not like anybody's running away with this thing.
Right.
So there's the opportunity for within 1 week, the Steelers to be one win away from the 1 seed. And I think at that point, that changes everything.
Yeah, I agree with you. I wrote an article this week. I'm going to look up some stats here on Russell Wilson, so I want you to answer another question for me here. I wrote an article this week about the Steelers' path to the playoffs, and we talked a little bit about this on the Steelers Fix, right? Who we will want to see. I just wanted to get an idea. If you had to pick, if you had to sit back and say, okay, if the Steelers want to go to the Super Bowl, this is what needs to happen. What would that path look like for you? I don't necessarily mean just who would they play, but how do they get there? Do they have to win the division if they're gonna be able to go to the Super Bowl, or do they just have to draw a lucky schedule in the playoffs? What is your path? Do they have to get the 1 seed? I mean, whatever that is for you. What do you think that path is for the Steelers if they want to get to a Super Bowl this year? You can be as specific, whatever direction you want to take this.
I'm going to take one player on the defensive side of the ball. I think Minkah Fitzpatrick needs to be the clutch player he was just a couple years ago. If he can get back to that, I think that's all the Steelers need, regardless of who they play, regardless of what they are. I think this offense is good enough where it's at right now. Pat Freiermuth, George Pickens, Russell Wilson, as long as that offensive line can stay healthy and we don't suffer any more injuries along that line, I think it's good enough to limp through. We talked about all offseason about how if the offense can just be middle of the pack. Well, they are middle of the pack. You could argue they were middle of the pack with Justin Fields, but they're, if not middle of the pack, they're a little bit better than that right now, I would say. They're putting up points. They're actually putting touchdowns on the board instead of field goals. And let's not forget that the Steelers haven't used Justin Fields as a weapon yet. They could still use him as a weapon, and I think that's huge. I think they're saving him for the playoffs for that. The Steelers did not just bring in Justin Fields for no reason at all other than to just sit on the bench. Now, it could be that he's part of their future plans as well. I kind of hope he is. But regardless of what happens, that they're going to try to use every piece they can on this 53-man roster, especially considering their maybe lack of depth at wide receiver, maybe their lack of depth at other positions. They can use Justin Fields as a gadget guy in this offense, more of a Taysom Hill, but a more explosive one. the defense is where it matters, and the defense as a whole is solid, but the Steelers defense needs to start putting points on the board against bigger teams. Minkah Fitzpatrick needs to be that guy he was just a couple years ago, that ball hawk who can start picking off passes. If he can be that guy once again, this team can go places in the playoffs.
Yeah. It's a great answer. For me, and I hope everybody will still read the article, but I'm going to tell you anyway. For me, the Steelers have to win the AFC North. If they want to get to a Super Bowl, you need to have a chance at 2 home games in the playoffs. And if you win the division, I think that puts you in a good spot for the 2 seed. Because I think in order to win the AFC North, you're going to have a really good record, right? You're going to have to beat a Ravens team that's probably only going to lose 5 games at most, maybe 5 or 6 games. So you need to be in that same range. And if you do that, you probably get a shot at the 2 seed. If maybe even the 1 seed. Who knows what happens to the Chiefs down the stretch here? I think it's a big deal. Nobody's going to really talk about it, but Harrison Butker's out for the next 4 weeks on IR. And for a team that plays a lot of close games, to be missing one of the best kickers in the league, that's a huge deal, right? I think that could come back to bite them against Buffalo even this week. So, but I think they need to win the division. I think they need to draw a team like the Broncos in the wild card round. But I think the most important one is who you draw in the divisional round, right? Because if you draw a team like Buffalo, maybe you're the 3rd seed, say, and you have to go to Buffalo. That's a tough draw to have to do that. So if you're the 2 seed and Buffalo comes to your place, you feel a little bit better about that. But how much better would it be if you end up having to face Houston in the division round, or maybe one of those wild card teams wins, like the Chargers or something like that, or even the Ravens? What if the Ravens were to win their wild card matchup and they end up being the higher remaining seed, something like that, where you end up playing the Ravens? That to me would be a dream scenario come true. So if the Steelers went, say Denver in the wild card round and you win that game, then you draw maybe Baltimore or Houston in that divisional round. To me, that gives you a good chance to get to an AFC championship against the Chiefs. And then you have a shot, right? Because the Chiefs, I think the Chiefs and Steelers play a very similar brand of football, and I think that they would match up very well together. It's just, can you keep Patrick Mahomes from making the plays to kill you when the game gets late? Can you keep him on the sideline maybe? What can you do to mitigate that? That's my path to the Super Bowl for the Steelers. It's not going to be easy. You're going to need a little bit of luck. You've always needed a little bit of luck if you're going to make a Super Bowl, though. Both times the Steelers won a Super Bowl in the 2000s, somebody else knocked off the Patriots for them, right? The times that they had to play the Patriots in the AFC Championship game, they did not go to the Super Bowl. 2004, 2016, if they drew the Patriots in the playoffs, it was usually over. So that you get a little lucky sometimes. I think that would need to happen for the Pittsburgh Steelers. But my last question here, since we're not getting any other questions so far, I just want to bring this up real quick. Russell Wilson, okay? Let me give you his stat line projected over a 17-game sample if he had started the season, okay? If he had started from the beginning of the season, Russell Wilson, sorry, now I need to pull it up. Russell Wilson would be on pace for 4,176 passing yards, okay? He would be on pace for 40 touchdowns, total touchdowns between rushing and passing touchdowns. And he would be on pace for only 6 interceptions. Now, the completion percentage right now is just below 60. But given the state of the MVP race right now, if Russell Wilson's numbers projected over the course of a full season, if you played like this all year, is this a guy that should be in the MVP conversation if that type of production was out there for a full year?
I mean, if the Steelers are having the same success they are now and it continues over the rest of the season, you'd have to say, why not? Right? I mean, I don't think that if he would have started the season, I'm not saying he would have had the 40 touchdowns, but it's an
Right.
interesting conversation to have. The Steelers are throwing the ball in the red zone, which is something that Denver did not always do last year. And he still had pretty good numbers in Denver.
26 touchdown passes last year. Yeah.
his number, people thought that just because he wasn't putting up the big numbers he had in Seattle to the level he was, that he's just a washed quarterback. If you watch last year, he really was not that bad. He was not put in good position by Sean Payton. That whole relationship was just messed up from the beginning. And now he's free and he's playing like Russell Wilson of old again. And he likes being able to chuck it downfield. He doesn't like to be controlled by a certain coach, which I don't always agree with that mindset. Yeah. But that's when Russell's played at his best in the NFL, when he can just be himself. And the Steelers are letting him do that. And this is the first quarterback since Ben Roethlisberger that the Steelers have allowed that to be the case. They had never took the reins off Mitchell Trubisky. They never took the reins off Kenny Pickett. They never took the reins off Justin Fields even. Yeah. They just let Russ be Russ. I don't know if it's just the fact he's a veteran, a proven vet in the locker room, and they're like, hey, Russ, you do whatever. You're on your way to the Hall of Fame. Just do whatever. There's something there where there's definitely a respect that the Steelers have for Russell Wilson that they have not had for any other quarterback since Ben Roethlisberger. And the Steelers are allowing him to just kind of roam free. And I think that's helped him. I wanted to ask you, though, because I know Reginald Rivers had asked earlier about if we thought that he had played himself into a contract extension.
Oh, I think I lost you.
Oh,
go ahead.
Am I there?
You're back. Yep.
Okay. I wanted to ask you, because Reginald Rivers was mentioning earlier, talking about if he had played himself into a contract extension. What do you think about this? Because I'm not really sure. I'm not really sure how I feel about it, because I really want to see Justin Fields. I want to see Justin Fields get another chance at it. But I want to get your thoughts. You're the Ohio State fan.
Yeah.
I'll let you take this.
I have severe mixed emotions about this. But I think, yeah, if excuse me, if the Steelers win a playoff game, right, and say they're in the divisional round and they lose something fluky or a really close game where, man, the other team just got the ball last and didn't get a chance. It wasn't his fault that they lost. Or if they happen to win divisional round, they go to AFC championship game. I think you have to bring him back. I don't see how you couldn't bring him back on some type of contract, because you're now proven that you are a Super Bowl contender with Russell Wilson at quarterback. And you've seen enough then to project that maybe he's got 2 more years or so of that type of play where you can stay in that window. I think you'd have to move on from Fields at that point. You just have to do that. But I think, like, for me, the possibility of winning a Super Bowl inside these next 3 years of Mike Tomlin's contract extension, that would trump the desire to move on from the old guy for the young guy, if that makes sense, especially if you're proving that you can play winning football with a guy like that under center, just making the plays that are there and lobbing up some deep balls and relying on the running game. And then the Steelers, if you do that, you have a clear objective in mind for the next season, this off season, right? Where, okay, Russ is our established guy now for this next year. Here's what we need to do. We need to draft a defensive line, draft in the secondary. We need to draft a receiver. We need to add free agents that help us be a little bit more efficient in the run game, fill our holes on defense. You have basically the mandate right there in front of you of what you need to do to take the next step. So if you make it to the divisional round this year and you're competitive in that game and Russell Wilson is a reason why, then I think you have to bring him back. But anything less than a playoff win, I don't know if they would bring him back.
I would agree with that. It all comes down to price, but when you put in the draft, we're going to be talking about the draft this week on the Draft Dynasty podcast. When you look at the quarterbacks, outside of Cam Ward and Shedeur Sanders, I'm going to be perfectly honest, I don't think that I would really want to mess with any of these projected first-round quarterbacks. It's just me.
Yeah.
And, I mean, you could have maybe argued if Jalen Milroe gets back into that conversation, but even if we're talking Milroe and comparing him to Fields, would you really take a Milroe over a Justin Fields? I wouldn't.
No.
I would still take Justin Fields. Fields has at least proven something, whether you like him or not as a player for the Steelers. He did a solid job with what he was given. Obviously, Russell Wilson's done better. But let's not forget, Russell Wilson has had more freedom. I don't know that anyone can argue that. He's had more freedom to improvise in this offense than what Fields was allowed. I still think that there's more that we have not seen from Justin Fields, but the Steelers have to get to a point where they'd be willing to unleash him. I would like to see the Steelers extend Fields, but like you said, if you extend Wilson, you can't extend them both. One, financially, if you want to win a Super Bowl, it makes no sense to pay your backup quarterback as much as you're probably going to be paying your starter. And from the other standpoint, you just have to let Fields go and have a chance to earn a job somewhere else. There's a lot of quarterback jobs that are going to be open this offseason. There's not enough quarterbacks in the draft to fill them all. So he's going to get a chance somewhere if he wants it.
Yep. And Kyle Allen would be a serviceable backup for Russell Wilson. You can draft somebody for developmental purposes. I wouldn't be opposed to, not saying Quinn Ewers necessarily, but drafting a Quinn Ewers type in the second, third round this offseason and
a guy we talked about in Draft Dynasty a week ago, Curtis Rourke from Indiana, could be in that middle round range, maybe fourth round pick. Get him with that NFL size. Not a great arm, but he's got a quick release. Has some upside as maybe a low end starter, high quality backup. Yeah.
So there's a plan where things can work out, even if you decide to stick with Russ on a 3-year deal or something like that, where you're paying him till he's 38 and you see what he can do in these next couple years with an out for the final year, whatever you need to do there. And I don't think it would break the bank either, necessarily. Maybe like a Kirk Cousins deal, which I would have been fine with for Kirk Cousins this year. Honestly, like if the Steelers had pulled the trigger on $45 million a year for Kirk Cousins, I would have been just fine with that. So I know a lot of people were not wanting them to do that. And I think the Steelers are better off now that you know what you have in Russell Wilson, that you're paying him $1 million. But who could have known that at the beginning? I think if you have a chance to lock him up and he's getting you in position to go win a championship, then I think you can do that. So, all right, that's going to do it for us here on the Steelers Q&A. I appreciate everybody tuning in. Thank you for your questions. Thank you for your comments and your interactions. We're going to be back next week, but it won't be Thursday. It will probably be Sunday next week because the Steelers do play on Thursday Night Football against the Cleveland Browns, and we'll have a special guest that week as well to talk about the game that was instead of a look ahead to the game that will be. But Andrew, anything you want to plug for the listeners here before we head out?
I'm going to pull up one comment from an outside Steelers fan, which I think there's no better way to close the show. It's just obvious, right? We win the next 2 Super Bowls, Russ goes into the sunset and Fields takes over, right? That's totally realistic.
That's a great hypothetical.
Yes, I think we'd all love it. But no, on the SteelCurtainNetwork.com, I've got my weekly draft stock report, the players that rose from the previous week's action. This week's list includes Shedeur Sanders, includes a couple of really good pass rushers. Jared Ivey from Ole Miss had a couple sacks. He's moving up boards. Those Ole Miss pass rushers are moving up boards, man. I'm telling you what. But keep an eye on that. There's a lot of pass rushers we've been talking about, but they keep coming. So keep an eye on all of that. And obviously this week on Draft Dynasty, we're going to be talking some draft.
Yep. Tune into that Draft Dynasty podcast tomorrow. It's going to be a lot of fun. You'll enjoy it. So thanks again to all the listeners. You are what makes this show tick. So we appreciate your input, and we will talk to you next time here on the Steelers Q&A.